So Nintendo announced the NES Classic Edition coming out November of this year. It looks awesome. The internet loves it. Stupid ass BuzzFeed loves it. I love it. I think it's a great thing. Nintendo's doing something awesome with their license and even getting third parties on board. But because this console has so much hype around it, other clickbaity news websites have been posting about other older emulation devices as if there's something new. If you really can't wait for this thing, or maybe you want some more control over your emulation, then let's get some facts straight and let's talk about what you can get your hands on right now. The NES Classic Edition has a big leg up over its competition in that it's actually made by Nintendo. A lot of these news websites have been posting about this Sega Genesis console as if it's Sega's answer to the NES Classic. This console has actually been around since 2012. All they're doing this year is slapping a Sonic 25th anniversary box over it. I remember seeing this thing in Rite Aid. It's actually not even made by Sega. It's made by Games. The games are just licensed from Sega. The cool thing about this console is that it has a cartridge slot, so you can play physical Sega Genesis games. It even has a neat little switch on the back, so you can switch between PAL and NTSC formatted games. It is unfortunate that the Games Genesis Classic reportedly emulates games very poorly. It does not upscale to HD, it only has an RCA output, and the audio quality is terrible even if you use a physical cartridge. Games also makes a portable version. This one also has built-in games, but adds an additional SD card slot. For a licensed product, it's kind of insane that they encourage downloading ROMs. It does have the ability to connect to a TV, but again, the audio quality is terrible, and some ROMs just flat out don't work. I would not recommend this thing if you wanted to play downloaded ROMs. In the same vein, but on the Nintendo side, there's the Supaboy. This one plays SNES cartridges in a portable form factor with the option of outputting to a TV using AV cables. It even has two full-size controller inputs right on the front. While this device is probably the coolest one, it's not at all licensed by Nintendo, has no pre-installed software, and cannot run ROMs. So it's not really an emulation device. It's also big as hell, but it was cool enough to be included on this list. Another officially licensed console is the Atari Flashback. It has a bunch of preloaded games on it, such as Asteroids, Breakout, Centipede, Lunar Lander, Missile Command, Pong, and a whole lot more. There's been multiple versions of this thing. They've been out for a really long time. You could just walk into Target or Walmart and pick one up, but it just seems that nobody really cares too much about Atari games anymore. And as such, I have nothing more to say about that. The Hyperkin Retron 5 is an Android-based retro gaming console that can play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advanced, Famicom, Super Famicom, NES, Super NES, Sega Genesis, and Mega Drive cartridges, actual cartridges. It also upscales to HDMI very well. If you want one device that can play all of your retro game cartridges, this is your guy. There are, however, some minor problems with the emulation. The Retron doesn't actually run the games off of the cartridges. It pulls the ROM off of the cartridge and holds it in RAM and runs the game off of its Android operating system. This didn't work too well with some games, especially multi-cart games like Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but they are constantly rolling out firmware updates to fix support issues like this. It does not come pre-installed with games, and it is not officially possible to install ROMs off an SD card, even though the Retron 5 has an SD card slot. That slot is mostly for save states and updating the firmware. It is currently possible to download and install unofficial software that allows you to run ROMs, but it's not officially supported by Retron, and it's not exactly user-friendly. Hyperkin also made this Smart Boy attachment for Android phones, which could turn any Android phone into a Game Boy, but it's currently only for developers because there's no software to support it. That didn't stop The Verge from reporting on it as if it's a real tangible thing for iOS. But you know what? One day it'll be cool. All they had to do was say it was in development. They didn't have to say that it's doing what it says, that it's currently not possible to do what they are saying. That if you want to run ROMs, there are a bevy of unlicensed, unofficial, unsupported handheld devices that allow you to download and run your own ROMs. The quality of these are variable, especially for what they cost. They're made of cheap plastic and they're not very user-friendly. It's also up to you to get your own ROMs, since it might not exactly be legal to be downloading free games. I'm gonna sit here and pretend like we're not all guilty of it. Of course, playing ROMs on the computer is the best option. There are plenty of great and easy to use emulators out there. I highly recommend OpenEMU for Mac. Just get yourself a nice controller like an Xbox One or an Xbox 360 controller, or really any plug-and-play USB controller. Many people would suggest a Raspberry Pi, and that is an option, but it does take a decent amount of time to set up. It's not exactly as plug-and-play as, let's say, the NES Classic. If you have any old devices laying around, like old tablets, old smartphones, old computers, those could easily be converted into game consoles. Even some older game consoles are easily hackable. I've heard really good things about PSPs and Wii Homebrew, but in my experience, the DS Lite is super easy to hack. All you need to get your hands on is an R4 chip. They provide the software that you need to drag and drop onto a micro SD card, and then you need to download the ROMs and also drag and drop those onto the ROM folder of the SD card. So as long as you can drag and drop files, then you're done. And as long as you can avoid the giant download buttons on these ROM websites. But again, this obviously isn't officially licensed, so you've got to do a little bit of work on your end. And I know that that's not for everybody. People just want to buy something that works right out of the box, and something that's supported by a big name company. And that's why the NES Classic Edition is cool as hell. So what do you guys think about emulating your old games? How do you do it? What devices do you use? I've used many emulation devices back in my day. Let's see, I've used the R4. I think I had a Game Boy Advance and a DS one. I heard that they just figured out how to hack a Vita, but I'm not going to do that because I like getting the updates on my Vita. Of course, there's the stuff on the computer, which is easy. RetroArch on the phone works really well. Get yourself a nice Moga controller, but that's not exactly user-friendly and only works some of the time. The easiest experiences I've ever had are games on the computer and games on the little R4 chip. That was surprisingly easy. Also, what do you think about the NES Classic Edition? Do you think it's cool? Would you rather use a Raspberry Pi? Do you want it to support downloadable virtual console games? Which, I mean, just buy a Wii U if you want that. Leave it in the comments below. Add me on Twitter, all of this other social media garbage. New videos every single Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Wednesday nights is Wulff Den Live. Join us for our live podcast. Talk to us, hang out with us. And of course, the most important things that you could do is subscribe and share this video with a friend, one that is into this retro stuff and into this NES Classic Edition. Show them how they can get that crap right now very easily. Thank you guys very much. Have a good week. I grew up a Sega Genesis kid. It wasn't until later in life that I got myself a Super Nintendo. Actually, Will bought it for me for my birthday like 3 years ago. People who grew up with the Sega Genesis catch a lot of flack for missing out on some of the best games like Mega Man X, Super Mario World, and A Link to the Past, but I've done my fair share of backtracking. So I'm giving all of these games that I missed out on a chance. And if you grew up with a Super Nintendo and not a Sega Genesis, I think you owe it to yourself to give all of these games a chance.